On today's Film and Whiskey, we're working with an ingredient that's perfect for fall and winter. We're talking about honey syrup. We'll teach you how to make your own honey syrup, we'll introduce you to 2 cocktails that use it, and all the while we'll be trying 3 whiskeys from the fantastic Old Dominick Distillery. That's all ahead on Film and Whiskey. Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. We are back with another special bonus episode. And once again, we are continuing our series that we are calling How to Cocktail. This is where we walk you through just really simple, easy to make whiskey cocktails so that while you spend time at home during quarantine, you can become a pretty legit home bartender and have a nice little arsenal of whiskey cocktails to make. Brad, I am so enjoying this bonus series so far.
Yeah, Bob, I will not lie. That whiskey sour with the egg white is still just percolating in the brain, man. It's so freaking good.
Well, I think that you're going to really like at least one of the cocktails that we're going to make today then, Brad, because it really is just a variation on the whiskey sour. We're making 2 cocktails today, and the thread that ties the 2 of them together is that we're going to be using a kind of a special ingredient. The weather is starting to get colder outside, Brad. We are like in the middle of fall now. And being in Ohio, I just feel like it could snow any day. Who knows? It's like 70 degrees right now, but I would not be surprised if it snowed tomorrow. And so I think it's time for us to kind of lean into some more fall and winter-centric cocktail ingredients. And so we're introducing honey into our cocktails. It seems like a very simple thing to add in, but it adds such a different layer than using your regular simple syrup.
Yeah, Bob, I absolutely love honey. However, I've mostly only ever used it like on some toast with peanut butter or in my tea, things like that. It's not something I often pull off the shelf when making a mixed drink.
Yeah, well, specifically today, we're going to be looking at how to use honey syrup in your whiskey cocktails. So we're making 2 drinks today that have honey syrup as an ingredient. The first is called the Gold Rush, and the second is called the Brown Derby. Now, the Brown Derby is an especially famous whiskey cocktail. The Gold Rush is the one that I was referring to earlier, which is kind of just a variant on the whiskey sour. And so if you were following us through that whiskey sour episode, you already know most of how to make that cocktail. So we're going to walk through that one really, really quickly. And we're going to be trying them with some whiskey from the Old Dominick line. Old Dominick is a really awesome company out of Tennessee. We are huge fans of. We actually tried one of their bourbons, their Huling Station 100 proof bourbon, on an episode that we did with our friend Bourboneering on his podcast. We all 3 drank it together and gave our thoughts on that Old Dominick Huling Station bourbon. So if you'd like a full review of that bourbon, go check out that episode. But we're going to give it some quick thoughts on this episode today too. But like I said, we are trying 3 whiskeys from Old Dominick. Brad, what are the other 2 that we're trying today?
Well, the other 2 we're trying is a blend of straight whiskeys. This is a 100 proofer, so we're working with a little bit higher of an alcohol content here. And I'm actually really excited for this, Bob. I think blended whiskeys, they can kind of get a bad name sometimes. It's like, oh, you couldn't just make a single barrel, so you tried to make something blended. I don't care. If you blend something and it tastes spectacular, that's all I care about. I want to drink something that's tasty, and I like Huling Station a lot, so I'm excited to see what they have up their sleeve here. And then the third one, which I'm probably most excited about, is a straight wheat whiskey. You notice I didn't say the word bourbon in there. That's because wheat is the primary ingredient in here. And Bob, I'm really bummed for this little 90 proofed miracle here.
Yeah, me too, Brad. And I do want to say, when it comes to that, the second one we mentioned, the blend of straight whiskeys, it's not the same as just calling it a blended whiskey, which is like what we had when we tried Seagram 7, which is whiskey that could be blended with neutral grain spirits, like whiskey flavored vodka. This is a blend of different kinds of whiskey that are all straight whiskeys that are blended together. So it could be, their bourbon blended with a wheat whiskey, blended with a rye, for example. So it's all whiskey. We're not just adding neutral grain spirits into the mix here. And I think that is an important distinction to make.
But in the end, the most important thing we're going to do is taste these whiskeys. So, Bob, which one do you want to give a try to first?
Well, let's go ahead and give just some really brief thoughts on the straight bourbon whiskey. Now, again, this is a 100 proof whiskey. If you want to hear our full review of it, go check out our friend Bourboneering and the podcast episode that we guested on. But, Brad, I have it poured out in my glass here. It's just a really beautiful nose. It's very spicy, very pepper forward. I actually get a little bit of that cola note that we've been getting time and time again lately. It's got some nice gingery kind of notes for me. It's just a really pleasant, spiced nose.
I was going to say, for me, it all comes down to sweet and spicy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have some notes of sweetness on it, that cola, but really you get those beautiful ginger notes that just draw out a lot of spice on your tongue and on your palate. I'm really impressed with this whiskey, Bob.
Yeah, and then it's the same thing when I take a sip of it, Brad. It's like they captured the essence of like a Coca-Cola and then added some great oaky notes to the back of it and some 100 proof alcohol. It's a really great, sweet, caramely cola flavor. And I don't really know how else it's not like a super complex whiskey. It's just a really, really nice sipper. And especially if you like a little bit of oakiness on the finish, I think this one definitely has that in spades.
Well, and when we move over to the blend of straight whiskeys, I think that you move from a little bit of that cola to a very oaky, oak forward nose that is actually a little interesting for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And yet I also feel like this one has some more kind of classic whiskey notes on it. I think this one's a little bit more well-rounded. It has a little bit more caramel to the nose, and yet it's not a bourbon. So I'm excited to see how that translates on the taste here, Brad.
Yeah, and as I drink it, I actually do feel like it has a lot of classic notes. There's a little bit of youngness to it, I think. But overall, it's got some nice caramel, a little bit of vanilla, some oakiness to it that really matures on the finish.
Yeah, I definitely think they probably are using some wheat whiskey in this blend. It's got that sort of great Weller kind of taste to it, a good wheater, and I like that a lot. It does taste like a wheated bourbon. I actually think that I might prefer this blend of straight whiskeys to the straight bourbon. Brad, which one are you preferring so far?
I'm definitely leaning towards the blend.
Yeah, me too. And I think this is actually going to hold up really, really well in a cocktail. And so Brad and I actually took this blend of straight whiskeys and we're going to use it in our first drink of the day, which is called the Gold Rush. But before we get there, Brad, our main ingredient for the day is honey syrup. And so we need to tell the people how to make some honey syrup.
Yeah, just throw some honey in water and boil it.
That's really it. It's
It's
just like simple syrup, guys. I just made a small amount at home today. Half a cup of honey, half a cup of water. The great thing about honey is that you can just kind of nuke it to thin it out a little bit and get it hotter a little bit faster. So I just thinned out my honey a bit beforehand and poured, half a cup of boiling water into it, and there's your honey syrup. You let it cool off on the countertop, and you're ready to go. It was even easier to make, I feel like, than simple syrup, which actually required dissolving the sugar. This doesn't even require that much.
Yeah, and all you have to do is grab yourself a little, squirt bottle, put it in there, and you're set for honey syrup. And you just throw it in your fridge. I think it stays for about a month up until after you make it. So, make yourself a bottle, go to town on some mixed drinks, and really anytime a drink calls for simple syrup, go ahead and try this instead. You never know what little bit of, twinge of taste that honey is going to give you that will give a nuance to your mixed drink.
All right, Brad, so let's get into making our first drink of the day, the Gold Rush. Now, here's how to build the Gold Rush. So you just want 2 ounces of bourbon, 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice, and then 3/4 of an ounce of your honey syrup. Now, again, in the Whiskey Sour episode, we talked about how there were 2 different ratios you could use. You could use that 2, 3/4, and 3/4 ratio, or you could do 2 ounces of your whiskey to 1 ounce of lemon juice and a 1/2 ounce of honey syrup. It really just depends on how sweet you like your drink. Brad, I will say that I went with the equal parts honey and lemon, 3/4 and 3/4, and I still feel like this doesn't have quite enough sweetness to it. It doesn't seem to kind of balance out the lemon quite as much as I would have liked, and not as much as it did with the Whiskey Sour. So I think next time I make honey syrup, I might kind of tinker with the ratios a little bit, maybe not make it 1-to-1, maybe do like 1.5 times as much honey as I use water, because this one came out just a little bit tart for my taste. Did you make your Gold Rush yet, Brad?
I did, and I use for my Whiskey Sour the other week. I used the golden ratio 2, 1, and then a 1/2. This time I did the 2, 3/4, 3/4. I'm not gonna lie, Bob. I think it's actually a little bit too sweet for me. I think I'd go back to the golden ratio the next time I make this for myself.
Well, regardless of your preference in terms of how sweet you like your cocktails to be, the way you build this is just like you would with the whiskey sour. You add all of your ingredients into your shaker with ice, you shake it until it's frosted, and then you strain into a cocktail glass. You can serve it over ice if you'd like. You can serve it in a chilled coupe glass, which is how I preferred mine. It is a very, very easy cocktail to make. I did not go as far as adding an egg white to this, but because this is essentially a whiskey sour, you absolutely could add an egg white to this.
And I feel like I would recommend that. That it just makes it so silky and smooth that the next time I make this, I think I'd go ahead and throw that egg white in there.
Yeah, I think I agree. Brad, did you notice a flavor difference adding the honey component to this as opposed to just regular simple syrup?
Yeah, I think that you just get a little hint of that honey flavor instead of just neutral sweetness. That really adds a little bit of something to your drink. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I think this is a really good jumping off point as we get into kind of, autumn themed and winter themed beverages. Like we said a couple weeks ago, the whiskey sour is something that you could make a million permutations of. I've seen people use maple syrup in place of simple syrup. And I feel like, especially in the fall, a maple whiskey sour might even be a better representation of that than this Gold Rush is. Not to say that the Gold Rush is bad. And again, guys, if you know to just swap out simple syrup for honey syrup, now you know two different drinks, the whiskey sour and the Gold Rush. And now that I've just let you in on my maple syrup secret, you know a third option as well. So the options are limitless when it comes to the whiskey sour.
Is that like a Canadian Gold Rush?
What's that? The maple? We'll call it the Yukon Gold.
the Yukon Gold.
That's
bro.
right.
That's what I'm talking about.
So the Gold Rush is also a variant of a really classic gin cocktail that's called the Bee's Knees. It's one of the most famous cocktails in the world. You just use gin instead of whiskey. So it's gin.
Bob, we don't talk about gin on this podcast.
Hey, man, I'm a big fan of gin.
Gin is not always up my alley.
All right, well, fine. You didn't even let me finish my point. I was like halfway through. I was like, yeah, you use gin, and you're like, no.
Yeah, Bob, gin is not really up my alley, but I think something that is up my alley is our next drink, the Brown Derby.
Yeah, the Brown Derby is a really classic whiskey cocktail. It's named after the famous diner in Los Angeles. I am really excited to try it. And Brad, for this one, we decided to use the Old Dominick wheat whiskey. So before we build the cocktail, let's give a quick review of what we think of this wheat whiskey. Do you have it poured out in front of you here, Brad?
Yeah, Bob, I do have this wheat whiskey poured out in front of me, and it smells a wheaty.
I'll tell you what, man, it has this really wonderful caramel honey scent to it. And I know it's just because we're using honey in this episode, but this smells like a big bowl of honey smacks to me. Like it has this great breakfast cereal kind of smell, and it's like decadent in terms of the caramel and the honey sweet I'm getting off of it.
Yeah, I'm not noticing as much of the sweetness, Bob. I think it definitely has a breakfast cereal smell, but for me, it's a little bit more of a Cheerios than a honey smack.
Well, let's just split the difference and call it Honey Nut Cheerios then.
Hey, let's do it.
Boom. All right, Brad, go ahead and give it a sip. I really like this. I think it drinks a little bit hotter than the 90 proof that it is. It's not super thick in terms of mouthfeel. You definitely can tell that it is a wheat whiskey. It has a much more grain-forward taste. It tastes a little bit younger as well, but I like it a lot, Brad. It almost has a sort of cherry-ish taste to me. It reminds me a little bit of that cherry-flavored bourbon we had from Traverse City a couple weeks ago. And I know that this isn't flavored, though, so that's just some of the great flavors that this wheat whiskey is bringing out with it.
Yeah, Huling Station is just doing a heck of a job down there in Tennessee, and we are so thankful that they were willing to send us these samples to review.
And Brad, I'm excited to see how this holds up in a cocktail like the Brown Derby. Now, again, we went from 100 proof with the bourbon and the blend of straight whiskeys down to 90 proof for this one. So my fear is that it might get swallowed up a little bit by the other ingredients in this cocktail. But Brad, can you walk us through what it looks like to build this drink, the Brown Derby?
Yeah, similar to the last one, you are just going to take all the ingredients, throw them into a cocktail shaker with ice, shake it up for 10 to 15 seconds, and strain it out. But the ingredients for this one is going to be 1.5 ounces of bourbon, an ounce of fresh grapefruit juice. And let me tell you what, if you haven't used grapefruit juice in a cocktail yet, you are missing out, my friend. Then you take a half an ounce of our honey syrup, you garnish it with a grapefruit twist, and Bob, you have an amazing drink.
Yeah, so two really quick things to point out. We're only doing 1.5 ounces of our whiskey this time instead of 2 ounces. That's just what the recipe calls for. It does call for bourbon. Obviously, we're using wheat whiskey instead. I don't think it really matters what kind of whiskey that you use as long as it's a whiskey that you like. And I really would recommend fresh grapefruit juice. Like, we have not been sticklers on calling for fresh lemon or fresh lime juice in anything yet. But I went to the store yesterday and got just this big, ripe, soft grapefruit. And you know what, Brad? Like, somebody got us a citrus reamer for our wedding, and I was like, when am I ever going to use this? Oh boy, did it come in handy today. Because I got some wonderful fresh squeezed grapefruit juice. And man, oh man, does it kick this cocktail up a notch.
Yeah, anytime you can use fresh ingredients, your cocktail is going to take the leap to the next level. I mean, I remember getting margaritas at a little Mexican restaurant where I lived when I was first married. Their classic, like, signature margarita is spectacular. And it's because they use literally a fresh lime, a fresh lemon, a fresh orange in every single one of their signature margaritas. And it just makes for a better product. Mm-hmm. So when you're throwing real, fresh grapefruit juice in here, it's going to be absolutely amazing.
And Brad, like, I got a ruby red grapefruit, and it was actually sweeter than I'm used to because, again, I'm not a huge grapefruit eater, and so I'm only used to drinking grapefruit juice out of, like, you know, the whatever brand it is that you can buy one out of the vending machine or whatever, and it's always really sour and almost metallic tasting, and I'm like, you know, I'm not a huge fan of grapefruit juice, and I cannot tell you the difference in getting fresh grapefruit juice. Like, it was so much sweeter. It almost bordered on tasting like a blood orange or something. It was delicious, and it played so well with this honey syrup. You know, Brad, I know we're trying to teach people 2 different cocktails today, but I would far and away recommend trying this Brown Derby over the Gold Rush.
Yeah, Bob, the Gold Rush is good, but it basically just tastes like a whiskey sour with like a hint of honey on it. Whereas this Brown Derby, oh my gosh, dude, that grapefruit juice is spectacular. You get so many different things going on. And I really think the honey actually interacts so well with the tartness of the grapefruit juice in a way that it doesn't with the lemon.
And I think that kind of decreasing the whiskey just a tad and going down to 1.5 ounces, it makes this an all-around much smoother cocktail. Now, again, this is basically a sour, right? We're talking about citrus, we're talking about sugar and water and spirit. So this is a sour. Could you add an egg white to this? Absolutely. And I think it would still be delicious. It would make it even more silky smooth. But I think this one actually stands up pretty well on its own without the egg white in it.
Yeah, Bob. And if you're really looking to up your game a little bit, you need to check out a company called Hudson and Lee. They do some specialty honey-based simple syrups that are utterly fantastic.
Yeah, Brad, they actually sent us their classic mixer and their ginger spice mixer. Now, these are not just straight honey syrups. Like, they are a mixer. Actually, right on the bottle, it talks about how to use it in a margarita because it has lemon in it. It already has, like I said, ginger. It has spices. They actually put a little bit of apple cider vinegar in there as well to kind of give you just a little bit more of a boost in that tart department. And man, oh man, I tried a little bit in both of these drinks. The Brown Derby with that ginger spice mixer in it is like kicking it up even more. Like you've got a little bit of lemon to go with the grapefruit juice. Guys, if you don't feel like making your own syrups, I cannot recommend Hudson and Lee enough. I know that we didn't get a huge chance to give them a shout out today, but when it comes to honey simple syrups, they are the best in the game.
Yeah, we're super thankful for Huling Station, for Hudson and Lee, and Film and Whiskey Nation. We hope that you are out there cocktailing well. So keep at it. Thanks for listening in. For the Film and Whiskey Podcast, I'm Brad G.
I'm Bob Book. Make the Brown Derby.
We'll see you next time.